You hold the impossible in your hands. It's cold, heavy, with a pattern like waves on water, forever frozen in steel. This is a Damascus blade from the 13th century, crafted without microscopes or laboratories, only a bonfire, bellows, and a smith's hands. Yet in 1991, scientists looked inside and were stunned. They found carbon nanotubes and cementite wires, structures humanity only learned to create yesterday. But they were already there, 8 centuries ago. Nanotubes in the 13th century? Yes. And it wasn't a miracle. It was a lost technology. Imagine knowing the recipe for perfect bread, but then the flour vanishes. Not the right wheat, not the right yeast, not the right air. That's what happened with Damascus steel. The raw material, wootz steel, came from India, a special steel with impurities of vanadium, molybdenum, and niobium, mined from specific locations. Persians would smelt it, and Syrians would forge it. This was a fragile chain connecting 3 civilizations, like a spider web. When it broke, everything vanished. Have people tried to recreate it? Modern masters have, hundreds of times. They use the exact composition, ideal furnaces, and computer control. Yet 8 out of 10 blades still crack during quenching. This is because technology isn't just a recipe. It's the rhythm of the hammer blows, the temperature of the coals at midnight, the humidity in Damascus. It's knowledge whispered from father to son, unwritten, unmeasured, unformalized. And this is where it gets unsettling. We tend to think of progress as a linear path, always moving upward and forward. But Damascus steel proves otherwise. Sometimes, humanity takes a step forward only to lose it forever. Not because we forgot, but because we stopped understanding the language spoken by those who created it. Do you know that feeling? When you hold something beautiful and can't comprehend how it was made? This isn't just metal, it's a mirror. It shows that knowledge without transmission turns to ash, and we still haven't learned how to preserve it. Imagine a scorching day in Golconda. Dust stings your eyes, and the air shimmers over hot stones. In the 13th century, here in South India, slaves hauled black chunks of ore from the mines. This wasn't just iron, it was wootz, metal with a soul. Caravans carried it through Persia, across deserts, through wars. Only in Damascus were blades forged from it, blades that could cut silk in midair and never dull against bone. Why from here? Because the earth here remembered. Millions of years of geological shifts, volcanic eruptions, and ancient seas had embedded themselves in the ore. And within it were vanadium, molybdenum, and niobium. Only 0.01% to 0.03% of these elements. Seems little, but it was enough for tiny carbide crystals to grow during smelting. They were like seeds. During forging, they aligned into patterns, waves, swirls, lightning. Without these impurities, there would be no pattern, no strength, just dull metal. But here's the paradox. In 2005, scientists in Texas uncovered the secret. They analyzed ore remnants from abandoned Golconda mines and discovered that such a combination of elements doesn't exist anywhere else on Earth. Not in Siberia, not in Brazil, not in old Chinese deposits. It was a unique chemical. Fingerprint, like DNA. The ore couldn't be faked or replaced. It was a natural recipe, and it disappeared when the mines closed in the 18th century. Do you think modern technology can do anything? Try to find ore with 0.02% vanadium and traces of titanium. Try to replicate the geology of an entire region. It's impossible. Masters in Europe smelted the best iron for centuries and still produced failures because they lacked the ingredient. How do you bake a cake without vanilla if vanilla only grows on one island, and that island has sunk? Do you know that feeling? When you have everything, the furnace, the hammer, the knowledge, but lack one molecule? That's exactly how smiths felt after the 17th century. They forged, they quenched, they prayed. But the steel remained silent. And here's the crucial point. Even if the ore had survived, most blades would still have broken. Because the secret wasn't just in the earth, it was in the fire. It was in how the smith read the flame, how he knew. A little longer now, a little slower now. This knowledge wasn't written down, it was inhaled with the smoke. You are the heir to this enigma. And every time you try to recreate what has vanished, you encounter the same wall. It's not a lack of technology, it's a lack of the world where it was possible. 1981. A lab in Iowa. John Verhoeven slams his fist on the table. All attempts failed. He knew the composition, had pure metals, and forged layer by layer, just like in textbooks. But the pattern was faint, lifeless, years, hundreds of ingots, ash. Until one day, he turned off the hammer. He simply placed the ingot in the furnace and slowly, very slowly, lowered the temperature. 600, 700, 800 degrees. And then it appeared. Waves, swirls, lightning, just like on a 13th century blade. The secret wasn't in the forging. The secret was in the fire. Remember this moment. The pattern isn't born from a strike, but from a pause. In the zone between 600 and 900 degrees, vanadium carbides awaken. They grow, forming chains, microns long, but visible to the eye. Too fast, and the chains don't have time to form. Too slow, and the steel grains swell, turning the metal into brittle glass. This isn't chemistry. It's a balance on a blade's edge. And the ancient smiths, they had no thermometers. They read the flame, its color, from dark red to amber. The time, not by clocks, but by stars. They felt with their skin how the air trembled above the forge, and they decided, now, cool it, or wait until dawn. Knowledge painstakingly acquired over generations, passed down in silence, with a glance, a tremor in the hand. Do you know that feeling? When everything seems right, but it's just not it? Because you missed the pause, the very one where miracles are born. And here's the hard truth. Even with perfect ore, even with precise thermal cycling, 8 out of 10 blades cracked during the final cooling. Not due to error, but because the technology lived on the brink of destruction. Every pattern wasn't mastery, it was a lottery. And every successful blade wasn't a weapon, it was a miracle snatched from the jaws of failure. Modern experiments confirm, even with complete control, the chance of success is 20%. Imagine, you invest. A week, your soul, your dreams, and at the last moment, a crack. The metal crumbles to dust. You are the heir to this drama, not because you want to forge steel, but because every time you create something real, you enter the same zone, 600 to 900 degrees, where everything can disappear if you don't feel the pause. Now imagine, the caravans stopped coming, the ore disappeared, and the apprentice can no longer stand beside the master at the forge. He can't see how the master hesitates before a decision, now or never. The chain breaks, not from war, not from envy, but from silence. And then the fire falls silent, and the steel forgets how to be alive. Damascus, 1740. The sand on the street still remembers the clang of steel. A smith sits by a cold forge, fingers stained with soot, eyes vacant. He waits, as his father waited, as his grandfather waited. He waits for the caravan from Golconda. But instead of ingots, there's only dust and rumors. The mines are closed. The British intervened. The Marathas blocked the roads. Trade is dead. A month passes. Then another. In the furnace there's local iron, dull, soulless. He repeats the motions, the very ones that carved patterns in the air. But the metal doesn't respond. It cracks. It breaks. His knowledge is like a prayer in a dead language. Precise, sacred, useless. Apprentices leave. Some go to weavers, some to potters. Why learn to read the flame if there's only ash in the furnace? By 1750, the last true blade already lies in someone's chest. And in the forge, there is silence. Do you know that feeling? When everything you were taught suddenly stops working? Not because you made a mistake, but because the world changed and didn't tell you. Damascus steel technology was a system. Ore from India. Fire in Damascus. Experience passed down in whispers. Remove one element and everything collapses, like a house of cards. Colonial officials in London and Delhi saw the Golconda mines as just ore, raw material, a commodity. But they didn't know. It was a key. Without it, the lock wouldn't open. Ottoman Empire archives clearly record, after 1730, wootz steel supplies disappeared. Not reduced, disappeared. And here begins the bitter truth. By the 19th century, Europe was flooded with Damascus blades. Thousands, tens of thousands, but over 90% were fakes. They were made by welding, acid etching, deception. True blades were less than 5%. People paid for a myth, and the original had long been dead. You are the heir to this emptiness. Every time you believe a beautiful legend without checking the source, you return to that Damascus, where knowledge turned into souvenirs. But what remains today? In the dust of Persian archives, in forgotten Indian warehouses. Perhaps there's still an ingot, a record, a drawing, a key waiting for a hand that can read not letters, but fire. Look at your hands. What can you do but can no longer apply? Because the world has moved on, and you are left with silent knowledge. The chain broke not from an explosion, not from betrayal, but because the caravan simply didn't come. And no one noticed, until it was too late. The 18th century ended. The 19th began, and with it, deception. European aristocrats paid fortunes for blades that supposedly cut silk in midair. They swore the blade was magnetic, self-sharpening, and wouldn't break even against bone. But look under a microscope. Here's true Damascus, carbide chains woven into the steel like veins in marble. And here's a fake from Solingen, the pattern scratched with acid, just etching, like a pattern on cheap crockery. Do you believe in magic? Then imagine you hold an 18th century Damascus blade. It gleams. The pattern is mesmerizing, but it cut neither silk nor steel. It's theater, marketing, the desire to believe in a miracle when the miracle is long gone. And here's a chilling statistic. Over 90% of Damascus blades sold in Europe in the 19th century were fakes. True ones were less than 5%. The rest, factories in Remscheid, chemicals, cleverly etched patterns. And the owners? They swore before kings that their blade was a gift from Allah. But where did the myth of the self-sharpening blade come from? It's simpler. In true Damascus steel, the softer background wore away faster, exposing the hard carbide waves. They continued to cut, creating the illusion that the blade sharpened itself. No magic, just physics. And as for magnetism, checked. Zero anomalies. But in the era of romanticized Orient, any unexplained gleam turned into a spell. Do you know that feeling? When you buy handmade, and it's a factory stamp with a story glued on top? You're not foolish. You're a victim of the silence. The silence left after the last smith walked away from the cold forge. And the further true craftsmanship receded, the denser the fog became. Today, auction catalogs still sell Damascus blades from the 18th century. But the dating is false. They are products of the 19th century. Made not in Damascus but in a factory where steam engines drowned out the whisper of the flame. But not everyone accepted it. Some decided if myths filled the void, science must restore the truth. They delved into dusty treatises by al-Biruni, looked into steel under an electron microscope, sent samples to a synchrotron, and saw what the void had concealed. The technology disappeared not from war, not from envy, but because the world stopped listening to those who could read fire. You are the heir to this choice. Every time you choose a beautiful legend instead of an inconvenient truth, you become part of the same deception. But if you ask, what's beneath the pattern? You are already on the path to the real thing, because truth isn't in the shine. It's in the pause between 600 and 900 degrees, where steel is born and myth dies. In the early 11th century, in the quiet of a Persian library in Ghazni, al-Biruni bent over parchment. An oil lamp trembled in his hands. Before him lay a blade, not a weapon, but a riddle. He heard the metal sing under impact, saw it cut silk in the air, but couldn't explain why. He knew the ore was from Golconda, the impurities vanadium and molybdenum, smelted in crucibles at 1200 degrees Celsius. But the pattern, the flexibility, the strength of up to 2.5 gigapascals. We see the result but not the cause, he wrote. Honestly, without myths. His words lay in the dust for 8 centuries, until science returned to them. In the 1970s, An electron microscope first looked inside the steel and saw what the eye couldn't distinguish: vanadium carbides arranged in chains, like threads in a spiderweb. In 2005, geochemists analyzed ore from abandoned mines and realized such a combination of elements no longer exists on Earth. 0.02% vanadium, traces of niobium. This was enough for the steel to speak with the fire during slow cooling, not a metaphor. Chemistry. The metal itself formed the structure, like a tree growing in the wind. But here's the paradox. In 1991, scientists in Damascus took a fragment of a 13th century blade. They examined it with a transmission electron microscope and were astonished. Inside were carbon nanotubes, the very same ones humanity discovered that same year in a NEC laboratory in Japan. Ancient smiths didn't know the word nano. They didn't have thermometers. But their ritual, repeated heating, slow cooling from 900 to 600 degrees, created conditions where carbon itself assembled into tubes. Not magic. Autocatalysis. Chemistry that predated science by 8 centuries. Do you know that feeling? When you do something by feel and get a result you can't explain? That's how they were. Al-Biruni wrote by lamplight. Scientists looked into a microscope. Both saw the same thing. Technology isn't a set of instructions. It's a dialogue between the earth, fire, and hand. But even knowing everything, the composition, the cycles, the impurities, we cannot replicate what they did. Why? Because science has deciphered the language of steel, but hasn't learned to feel it. You are the heir to this disconnect, not between past and future, but between knowledge and body. And until you learn to listen to how the air trembles above the forge, the steel will remain silent. In a workshop on the outskirts of Seattle, the smith Mark pulls the 5th workpiece of the week from the forge. The surface is dull, covered in an oxide film, like an old coin. He added vanadium, molybdenum, repeated 20 cycles, heating to 950 degrees Celsius, slow cooling in an insulated box, all according to Verhoeven's articles, all just like in the laboratory. But when he wipes the blade with kerosene, the pattern is barely visible, faint, blurred, like a shadow. On the shelf are dozens of rejected ingots, cracks, twists, dead metal that doesn't ring, doesn't cut, doesn't respond. Mark isn't angry. He's just tired, because he realized he's copying the form. But the spirit is gone. And the spirit isn't the composition. It's the whisper at the forge, the teacher's gaze, the tremor in the palm before the decision. Take it out, or wait until dawn. Modern Damascus is not Damascus. It's welded metal. Layers of different steels pressed together by blows. Beautiful, yes, but it's a pattern on the outside. True Damascus was born from within, from a single ingot, where carbides themselves formed chains during cooling, without forging, without layers, only fire and time. Even if you recreate the composition of wootz steel, without ore from Golconda, without the intuition of a smith who read the flame by color and heard the metal by the sound of the strike, the steel will remain dead. You'll get an imitation, like a plastic rose. It looks similar, but it doesn't smell. And here's the harsh truth. Even under ideal conditions, less than a 20% baptise chance of success, 20 cycles of heating and cooling, at any stage, a crack, internal stress, ash. In the Middle Ages, smiths couldn't afford such luxury. One blade cost a soldier's annual wage. But they did it, because there was no alternative. Today we have everything: furnaces, spectrometers, pure metals. But no context, no sacred attitude, no silent transmission of knowledge, where an apprentice stands for years until he learns to feel how the air trembles over the coals. You are the heir to this emptiness. Imagine, you're repeating your grandmother's pie recipe. The flour is the same, the eggs are the same, but the pie isn't the same. Because Grandma kneaded the dough by the window, where the light fell at a 45-degree angle, and sang the same song. And you, in a hurry, in silence. It's the same with Damascus. We've learned to imitate the pattern. We've deciphered the nanotubes. But we can't bring back someone who could listen to metal with their skin, not their ear. And perhaps that's right. Some technologies are not meant to be recreated. They are meant to be reminders. Reminders of how easily what took centuries to create can disappear. And do you still believe that everything can be replicated? In 2010, in a laboratory at the University of Iowa, a group of sleepless individuals gathered, an archaeologist with a charred notebook from Damascus, a chemist whose hands knew the composition of every ore on Earth, a historian who learned Persian for 3 lines of al-Biruni, and a smith whose garage housed a forge smelling of ash and persistence. They didn't seek fame, they sought truth. Each brought their fragment, a ye. Blade shard with a Kirk-Nardebon pattern, data on vanadium from Golconda, a drawing of a crucible furnace. And they began to assemble, not a blade, but a chain. A chain of knowledge, fragments, pauses, whispers. But the closer they got, the clearer they saw. They wouldn't restore the technology. They would only understand how it died. Not from a sword, not from fire, from silence, from the caravan not coming, and the apprentice not asking, "How do you read the flame?" Knowledge doesn't disappear due to foolishness. It disappears when the connection breaks. Damascus steel lived in 3 points: ore in India, fire in Syria, and the master's gaze upon the apprentice. Remove one, and everything collapses. The British East India Company didn't want to destroy the steel. They simply closed the mines. A business decision. And that was enough. Smiths were left with empty hands and empty forges. Their knowledge was like a song in a language no one speaks anymore. You can write down the notes, but you can't convey the tremor in the voice. You can't convey how the air changes at 900 degrees. This knowledge isn't in a book, it's in the body. And when the body dies, the secret dies too. But Damascus isn't alone. Roman concrete strengthened underwater. Today's crumbles in 10 years. Why? Because the Romans mixed lime with Vesuvius ash. We mix it with cement from China. Greek fire burned on the sea. Its composition is still a mystery. Sung Dynasty porcelain was thinner than an eggshell and rang like a bell. The secret went with the emperor to his grave. All these technologies weren't stolen, not forbidden. They just stopped being passed down. Society decided, we don't need this, and forgot to ask, how is this done? If you think such a thing is impossible in the age of the internet, you are deeply mistaken. Knowledge is not a file. It is a living connection, a glance, a pause, the trembling of fingers when the master shows, here, don't rush. Without that, only imitation, like a plastic rose, beautiful, but dead. Progress is not a ladder, it's a covenant. I will transmit, you will preserve. Damascus steel is a reminder. It only takes one generation that stopped teaching or asking. Do you know that feeling? When you know how to do something, but there's no one left to show? You are the heir to this silence. What will you pass on? Everything we've learned boils down to one thing. Damascus steel disappeared not because of war, not because of envy, not because of magic. It vanished because a chain of 3 links broke. The first, the ore. Not just iron, but wootz from Golconda, with microdoses of vanadium and molybdenum from 0.01 to 0.03%. This was enough for the steel to speak. There's nothing like it left on Earth. The second, the fire. Not just a furnace, but a ritual. Slow cooling from 900 to 600 degrees for weeks, so that carbides could grow into chains, so that carbon could assemble into nanotubes. The third, transmission. Not a book, not a video, but silence at the forge, a glance, a tremor in the hand. When an apprentice watches for years as the master reads the flame. In 1750, the British closed the mines, not out of malice, just business. But that was enough. Without the ore, the fire is silent. Without the fire, transmission loses its meaning. The chain breaks, and knowledge dies. Not in archives, in the body. You are the heir to this story, not because you want to forge steel, but because every day you decide to transmit or to remain silent. When you write down your grandmother's recipe, you save it from disappearing. When you teach a child to fix a bicycle, you restore trust in hands. When you share not just the instruction, but the reason, why this way, you become a link. Damascus steel is not metal. It is a mirror. It shows civilization is built not on data, but on connection. We build servers, write code, launch satellites, but if we stop transmitting context, all of it will turn into a dead pattern, like acid etching on a fake blade. What if some secrets shouldn't be revealed? Think about it. Perhaps Damascus steel remained unsolved, not because we couldn't, but because we shouldn't. Perhaps its disappearance is not a failure, but a reminder that not everything in this world is meant for copying. Some things exist to disappear, so that we don't forget, knowledge is not possession, it is responsibility, and as long as we remember that, we won't lose the next Damascus steel, even if it looks like genetic code, like an algorithm, like a language no one speaks yet. Now the choice is yours. Should we continue to try and recreate Damascus steel, or accept that some technologies are gone forever? Write in the comments, recreate, or let go. This is not a question about metal. It's a question about the future. A future where everything can be copied, or where we respect the fragility of transmission. Look at your hands. What can you do, and who have you already shown? The chain waits.